Video, we'll examine different types of key relationships. In particular, we will look at relative keys, closely related keys, distantly related keys, parallel keys, and chromatic medians. You are likely familiar with relative keys by this point. These are keys that share the same key signature. So for example, C major and A minor have 0 sharps and flats and are considered relatives. B flat major and G minor have 2 flats and are therefore relatives. And A major and F sharp minor have 3 sharps and are relatives. Next, we'll take a look at closely related keys. These are keys that differ by no more than 1 accidental. Naturally, this includes the relative key. Counting the relative key, any given key has 5 close relations, and we'll demonstrate a couple of different ways to figuring out what those keys are. The first method involves listing the major and minor diatonic triads of the starting key. We're going to start with taking F major as an example. So first we list the major and minor diatonic triads, or really just all the diatonic triad qualities, as you know from previous studies in harmony. So major 1, minor 2, minor 3, major 4, major 5, minor 6, and diminished 7. From there, you can actually just write out what the triads are. Since there is no such thing as a diminished key, then therefore we can ignore the diminished chord, in this case the E diminished chord. And the ones that we are left with correspond to the keys that are closely related to F major. So, starting in relation to F major, there are 5 closely related keys, namely G minor, A minor, B flat major, C major, and D minor. Let's go through the same process using a minor key. In this case, we'll take F minor as an example. Now, the thing to remember here is that you have to use the chords that are diatonic to natural minor. So, in natural minor, we have a minor 1, diminished 2, major 3, minor 4, minor 5, major 6, and major 7 for the subtonic chord. From there, we write out what the actual chords would be. As before, there is no such thing as a diminished key, so we can ignore the diminished chord. And the 5 non-tonic ones that we are left with correspond to the closely related keys. So F minor is closely related to A flat major, B flat minor, C minor, D flat major, and E flat major. There is another way to figure this out. So what you can do is start with a key. In this case, we're going to take F major as an example again. Then you find the relative of that key, in this case D minor, as I already have marked here. Then you simply list the major keys a fifth above and below the major key, and the minor keys a fifth above and below the minor key. So going up a fifth in both cases yields C major and A minor, and going down in both cases yields B flat major and G minor. And we're left with this constellation of 6 closely related keys. So in relation to F major is closely related to all of the other ones on the screen, and conversely, actually, D minor is also closely related to all the ones shown here. Same thing works when you're starting with a minor key. Again, we'll go through F minor as our example. So F minor and A flat major are relative keys. Then you just take the keys a fifth above, keeping the qualities the same, and taking the keys a fifth below each, again keeping the qualities the same. So F minor is related to the other 5 that are shown here, and again similarly A flat major is closely related to the other 5 shown in this constellation. You might realize that this is exactly the same as looking at the adjacent keys on the circle of fifths. Speaking of which, we are going to use the circle of fifths to demonstrate a few properties about closely related versus distantly related keys. Again, sticking with F major as our starting reference key, just as an example. So if F major is our starting key, D minor is our relative key. And as you are accustomed to from previous studies, we often represent key relationships using Roman numerals. So I'm using the starting key as our major 1 since I happen to pick a major key as our example here, meaning that our relative key in this case is represented as 6. Notice that all of the closely related keys are very close to one another on the circle of fifths, as you see shaded here. All of the other keys are distantly related from F major, so that's the entire rest of the circle here. Notice that this particular part of the circle includes the parallel key. F major and F minor are parallel keys. They have the same starting note. What's interesting about this is even though the starting key and the relative key are closely related, the starting key and the parallel key are not technically closely related. It is a relationship that composers exploit quite a bit because of the ease of moving between two keys that share the same tonic pitch, but technically those keys are not closely related to one another. While we're thinking about closely related versus distantly related keys, it's interesting to point out the fact that these had different uses in the course of music history. The earlier you go within the common practice period, say Baroque or early to mid-classical, the more likely the keys in a composition are going to stick within the closely related constellation. The later you get within the common practice era, so starting in the late 18th century and increasingly so in the 19th century, the more likely composers are to include at least one distantly related key. Once you get to the 19th century, especially with composers like Schubert and Brahms, they often started investigating keys known specifically as chromatic mediants. So some examples. In relation to F major, some examples of chromatic mediants include A flat major and D flat major. These are related by simple mixture to F major, namely we have the flat 3 is A flat and the flat 6 is the D flat. Another set of chromatic mediants that also shows up occasionally in Romantic music are the ones related by secondary mixture, namely 3 sharp and 6 sharp. Now, strictly speaking, the sharp is not absolutely required because you still have the diatonic pitch. So for example, starting with F major, scale degree 3 is an A, and you simply using a capital Roman numeral 3 could be sufficient. But oftentimes in the analysis, it's nice to include the sharp to clarify that you do mean the secondary mixture chord as opposed to the simple mixture chord flat 3. It's nice to be able to distinguish between the two. Notice also that with flat 6 and flat 3, the flat shows that the root of the chord has been lowered by a half step. In this case, the diatonic third would be A, lowered by a half step to become A flat for that flat 3, versus if you're looking at the secondary mixture, the sharp comes after the Roman numeral, indicating the fact that it's actually the third of the chord that it's been raised. So again, taking A major as an example, F is our home key, scale degree 3 is A, so that scale degree 3 has not changed, but what has been altered is the next pitch up in that. Instead of the diatonic pitch C, you get the chromatically altered pitch C sharp. Therefore, it's a raised third in the context of the chord of A major. So this video presents the different types of common key relationships, specifically focusing on the difference between our closely related keys that are used very early in the common practice era and our distantly related keys that tend to be increasingly used in the Romantic era.